Previously on DFO Original Stories. The adventurer pursuing the remnants of Shiroko's will had arrived in the past era of Bakal's reign. There, they'd met the 7 meisters embroiled in their resistance for liberating Empyrean and assisted them to keep history on the correct path. However, Giselle had beat it to them in arriving in the past, allowing the Gaybolg to be completed at an accelerated pace for him to make his mark on history. The adventurers and the meisters joined forces to subjugate Gaybolg and allow history to run its intended course. But this resulted in the preordained deaths of the meisters in this history as well. They left behind the seeds of revolution for their future generations by humbly and stalwartly turning to dust. And now, the only thing left is for those who survived to light the flames of the revolution. Leaving behind the 7 meisters who had sacrificed themselves for Empyrean, the adventurers set sail for another distorted dimension. They were headed towards the era of the Machine Revolution, during which, after being culminated for 500 years, the victory against Bakal took place. But just then, the rift abruptly became unstable, causing everyone in the group to be flung off, each in separate directions. The Eternal Flame soldiers, cast into danger, appeared before the now solo adventurer. The adventurer saved them, resulting in the leader of the Eternal Flame introducing himself while thanking them for saving his troops. His name was Juvenile, the leader of the Eternal Flame. He'd become their most notable member by understanding and recreating the blueprints of the anti-Bakal weapon left behind by the 7 meisters. Juvenile, who now believes in the adventurer's capacity, promised his trust if they saved some soldiers he'd already considered dead due to a necessary baiting tactic. And so the adventurer joined the allied forces, meeting the central figures of the resistance. Irene, commander of the Empyrean allied forces, once the leader of the Black Roses, and was then appointed as the commander of the allied forces and is now tasked with gathering the will of all Empyreans into one. Spitfire Flo, a captain who succeeded Irene in becoming the leader of the Black Roses. Alongside them, the Empyrean Allied Forces rescue mission began. The adventurer was tasked with diverting the attention of the Gold Dragon Numak, located in the northern region of Ispins, in order to extract the soldiers. During their search for Numak, the adventurer met a noblewoman, Sarah Wayne. She was acting as a spy for the Empyrean forces by agreeing to be labeled a traitor, thus feeding them intel after being accepted on the dragon's side.
기습? 저자가 누마오그입니다. 방심하지 마세요.
미천한 분들이 제 공간에 방문하셨군요.
However, Numak caught on to their plan and tried to execute Sarah and put an end to the rescue mission. But he could not withstand the forged blade that was the adventurer and thus met his demise. Despite defeating Numak and successfully rescuing the Empyrean soldiers, Sarah chose to return to Bakal's palace to continue providing intel as a spy. Promising to meet again someday, the adventurer left her behind and returned to their base. Irene greeted them upon their return. While the adventurer had been gone, Michelle Curio, who had been displaced nearby the adventurer as well, had also joined up with the Empyrean forces. Irene had been trying to summon Company Do, which was in charge of the Empyrean Allied Forces weapon supplies and the Chief of Staff of the Empyrean Allied Forces. However, contact had been lost with them ever since they entered the Forest of Death. Eventually, the adventurer set off for the Forest of Death along with Michelle on Irene's orders. After arriving, an unidentified man and woman appeared that the Empyrean Allied Forces had been looking for. Rosa Jurgen, the Chief of Staff in charge of managing all battles, reconnaissance, and supplies. Weapon dealer Oscar, in charge of supplying the Empyrean forces and also the leader of Company Daw. After successfully locating the two, they were on their way to leave the forest when Rosa, who was precisely aware about their situation, spoke that Nacer, who was the reason the forest had turned evil, must be defeated. The adventurers group headed to the middle of the Forest of Death to awaken Nacer and start their battle.
여기까지 죽으러 온 거야?
Nacer went berserk by recklessly calling upon his powers after realizing the adventurer's true strength, but was soon subdued by them, and thus a ray of light finally shined within the forest that had seemed doomed for eternal darkness. The adventurer returned successfully with Oscar and Rosa. Finally, all the central figures of the machine revolution are together, excluding Sarah Wayne. All that's left to do was to procure the anti-Bakal weapons currently under development by the Eternal Flame. However, news arrived that the Green Dragon Itronok attacked the Eternal Flame's base of operations, the Tomb of Iron. The adventurer and Juvenile planned to recover the anti-Bakal weapon, and for this, the adventurer faced Itronok to buy some time. Iris and Shiran, who had been displaced in the Tomb of Iron and was already locked in combat with Itronok, came to the adventurer's aid.
사냥감이 나타났군.
Itronok rained down attacks upon the adventurer, who exuded a daunting aura even at a glance. But after realizing that he would never be able to defeat the adventurer, Itronok fled. However, the anti-Bakal weapon Dragon Slayer was fired. Itronok's scales were thus pierced by the science of the Empyreans. After finishing this test run of the weapon, Juvenile successfully transferred it. With everything now prepared, Irene gave a speech to reignite the final remnants of will left in the Empyrean allied forces.
모두 모였군요. 마침내 때가 왔습니다. 오랜 세월, 500년에 걸친 바칼의 폭정을 마침내 끝낼 때가 왔습니다. 주위를 둘러보십시오. 연합군에는 정말 다양한 사람들이 있습니다. 귀족과 평민이 있으며 남성과 여성이 있으며 어른과 아이가 있으며 출신 성분마저 불분명한 자들도 있습니다. 그러나 우리는 천개 연합군이라는 이름으로 하나 되어 지금 이 자리에 있습니다. 우리 모두가 천개인이기 때문입니다. 우리 모두가 지킬 가족이 있기 때문입니다. 우리 모두가 빼앗긴 땅의 통한을 알기 때문입니다. 그렇게 우리는 결연하게 적진에 들어갈 것입니다. 형제들이여, 저는 여러분 모두를 무사히 복귀시키겠다고 약속할 순 없습니다. 어쩌면 여기 있는 수많은 사람들이 죽게 될지도 모릅니다. 자매들이여, 우리는 패배할지도 모릅니다. 여러 선조들이 실패해왔듯이 우리 역시 실패자 중 하나일지도 모릅니다. 하지만 잊지 마십시오. 실패한 선조의 의지를 이은 우리가 있듯이 실패한 우리를 딛고 일어날 후손이 있을 겁니다. 우리는 눈앞에 펼쳐질 전장에서 죽을지언정 우리의 마음은, 의지는, 불꽃은 결코 꺼지지 않을 것입니다. 우리의 기계로 빚어낸 혁명의 불씨는 이제 걷잡을 수 없을 테니 불의 숨이 멎을 때가 왔다.
Through her speech, the forces readied their hearts one last time. All that was left was to defeat the flame dragon Ashkor, charge through the dragon's garden, and head towards Bakal's palace. The Black Roses and Empyrean allied forces had been scouting the dragon's garden, and upon encountering Ashkor, a great battle ensued.
기곤만장한 놈들이 왔군. 싸울 맛 좀 나겠는데 곧 축 처지겠지만 말이야.
Ashkor was defeated by determination that burned hotter than even his flames. Dragonoid soldiers formed long ranks before the Allied forces as if waiting for them. The Empyreans also contemplated the fact that this might be their last battle. Within this dire situation, the adventurers group speculated on what Shiroko might have distorted in this timeline. But this question was soon answered. The three great dragons of Bakal were guarding Bakal's palace. These three dragons had all once impacted Ara greatly, and the fact that they were not where they should have been indicated that this distortion of history was bigger than ever. Thus, the adventurer had only one choice: to help the machine revolution succeed and return the distorted past to its normal course. The Allied forces advanced quickly with the adventurer and reclaimed Sky's Wishgate, the entrance to the previous Empyrean palace. Although morale ran high after restoring the gate's name, the war had only just begun. To change the battle's course, they had to divide and conquer the dragons, then set up the anti-Bakal weapon. 3 squads were formed to take on the dragons: Flo and Iris for the Death Dragon Spirazzi, Juvenal and Sharan for the Ice Dragon Skaza, and Oscar and Michelle for the Berserk Dragon Hisma. The adventurer set off for the Death Dragon's Soul Palace to defeat Spirazzi first. On their way, the adventurer put to rest the not living, not dead souls of Empyreans, rendered so due to Spirazzi's influence that tried to stop them. Finally, they discovered Spirazzi. Spirazzi remained leisurely sprawled out while contaminating everything nearby with death. Upon the adventurer's arrival, Spirazzi unfurled the wings of death and flew up into the air. Spirazzi claimed that dragons had been waiting after changing up everything on Bakal's order, and that Spirazzi was curious to see whether the adventurer was someone who deserved such a plan. This confused the adventurer. Although Spirazzi kept on coming back to life to assault the adventurer, the Eternal Flame anti-Bakal weapon finally put Spirazzi to eternal rest with its everlasting flames. After defeating Spirazzi, the adventurer headed towards the next area. With the help of the Empyreans, they made it to the Ice Dragon's frozen palace. There, Sharan and Juvenal stood frozen solid, with Skaza waiting for the adventurer. Skaza proclaimed a test to see if the adventurer was worthy of knowing the truth, and thus worthy of standing before Bakal. The adventurer fell into uncertainty regarding the preparations mentioned by Spirazzi and Skaza, along with not knowing what this truth was. However, they could not remain uncertain for long. With Skaza's iciness blasting at them before their very eyes, even a split second's hesitation would be enough to freeze one whole. At the end of the vicious combat, the adventurer overcame the ice and defeated Skaza. Now only the Berserk Dragon Hisma was left. Flo radioed Oscar but received no reply. As an ominous current flowed throughout the battlefield, the adventurers' group hurried towards the Berserk Dragon's destroyed palace. What awaited the Allied forces upon their arrival was a collapsed Oscar and the defeated Berserk Dragon. Upon taking in the demolished surroundings, what had happened could be surmised. Oscar had targeted himself as the drop coordinate for the TNB anti-Bakal weapon in order to defeat Hisma. His sacrifice resulted in the Berserk Dragon's demise. Wounded grievously because of this, Oscar cheered the forces on even with his dying breath. It was then that the Allied forces understood the meaning behind his frequent chuckles and frivolous demeanor. It had all been for everyone's benefit. They did not have much time to grieve, however. The Allied forces had to put Oscar's death behind them to fulfill their ultimate goal. With all anti-Bakal weapons in place, the Allied forces reaffirmed their resolve to carry on the will of all the Empyreans that had been sacrificed. Meanwhile, Michelle and Juvenal were away from the battle, preparing for one final surprise. The adventurer closely approaches the cruel King of Dragons' palace, yet not a single dragon had blocked their path. It's as if Bakal wanted them to come to him. This arrogance once again fueled the resolve of those that were pained by countless sacrifices. Finally, they encountered Bakal, the cruel King of Dragons. Bakal was curious as to whether the forged blade that had reached him was worthy of learning the truth, and if they were capable of piercing through him. The same was true for the adventurer. They wanted to learn what the truth they had to confront was, and so wanted answers from Bakal. Thus started Bakal's test for receiving answers from one another. The adventurer did their best to withstand Bakal, but the long-standing tyrant and his might was no easy match. With help from the Allied forces' anti-Bakal weapon, the adventurer managed to persevere in battle. Amid the ongoing combat, Bakal finally acknowledged the adventurer's worthiness of the truth. And so, Bakal decides to face the adventurer as a dragon. Before testing the next level of the adventurer's limits, Bakal reveals the truth. Bakal had already met Shiroko's will long ago, and thus had not sent down his 3 dragons to Arad, which resulted in the current distortion in history. The new Genesis that Hilda had blind faith in had an enormous fallacy. It was that if Hilda had done nothing, the prophecy would have never come true. In other words, since it was Hilda, not fate, that had metastasized the apostles, all events that followed were of artifice as well. This meant that the new Genesis was created by some entity in order to veil some other purpose. Bakal concluded that the adventurer must now become a blade of firm resolve aimed at Hilda. For that to be possible, the adventurer would have to be able to pierce through himself first. By enduring Bakal's powerful flames, the adventurer proved their worth in the end. However, Bakal presented the adventurer he now deemed worthy with one last trial. All felt powerless as they beheld the might that was unleashed. Meanwhile, Juvenile, who had been away from the battle along with Michelle Curio, listened to a recording left behind by a certain person.
드디어 완성했어. 이제 진짜 청개가 만든 게이볼그라고 부를 수 있겠어.
정말 고생하셨어요, 쿠니오.
오드리즈, 만약 이 게이볼그가 움직일 일이 생긴다면 분명 바칼에게 주먹 한 방 먹일 만한 상황이라는 거겠지?
그렇겠죠. 미래의 사람들이 아무런 의미 없이 게이볼그를 찾아서 가동하진 않았을 테니까.
게이볼그의 가동은 테네브의 후손만 할 수 있도록 했는데 코드를 해석하는 데는 얼마나 걸릴까?
모르죠. 하지만 테네브의 이름을 이어받은 사람이라면 쿠리오의 코드는 금방 풀 수 있을 거예요.
그래, 미래에는 분명 더 엄청난 천재들이 나타날 거니까.
맞아요. 아직 다 크려면 멀었지만 결국 저 아이를 통해 미래는 계속 이어지겠죠.
그래, 그럼 이 녹음을 들은 사람은 바칼한테 한 방을 꽂아 넣었을 수도 있겠네? 거기 들려?
녹음? 언제부터? 미리 말을 했어야죠. 준비도 안 됐는데.
자연스러운 게 좋잖아. 너무 진지하게 남기면 재미없으니까. 거기 듣고 있어? 우리의 선택 때문에 고생이 많지? 꼭 말해주고 싶은 게 있어. 이건 테네브 혼자의 선택이 아니야. 바로 우리 모두의 선택이야. 그러니까 테네브는 배신자가 아니라는 말이지. 이걸 말해주고 싶었어.
그거 이리 내놔요.
키 좀 컸다고 대드는 거냐?
Realizing the truth, he reminded himself that this was no time to give in to the sudden internal chaos he felt. Piloting the Gaybolg, Juvenile appeared in front of Bakal.
늦지 않게 도착한 것 같네. 게이볼그!
Juvenile took Bakal head-on no longer as a runaway, but as the greatest wildcard the Empyreans could have ever had. Thus, Bakal witnessed the full strength of the Empyreans. A satisfied smile played on his lips. Bakal then met his doom willingly, just as he had promised the adventurer long before. The war was finally over. The revolution was successful, and it was now time to mourn the dead, heal the living, and start a new journey. Just as he'd thanked the adventurer for saving him when they had first met, Juvenal thanked him again for letting him know that he was not the descendant of the treacherous Tenebe, but that of Tenebe of the Seven Meisters, thus meaning that his honor as an Empyrean was unsullied. Assuring them that he'd take care of everything that followed, he ushered them to take their leave. Afterwards, just as in the original history, he decides to entrust everything to those he had faith in and leave without leaving a trace of his name behind. And finally,
천계를 위해 기꺼이 희생한 이들을 잊지 않을 것이며 두 번 다시 바칼과 같은 이에게 천계를 빼앗기지 않도록 항상 준비할 것입니다. 불꽃이 되어 오늘을 기다렸던 모두의 영혼이 이 자리에 함께하고 있으리라 믿으며 오늘 천계가 해방되었음을 선포합니다.
기억할 때 하늘의 별빛처럼 잊지 않게 나가 저 멀리 끝없이 펼쳐진 세상을 만들게 약속해 나
새로운 나라의 이름은
No, your actions set her plan off course. What's changed isn't the future, the present, it's the distant future. You've planted a tiny variable in her plan. I can finally set my plan in motion. You don't know how long I've waited for this day. I'm an old man hiding the dew and waiting to guide the blade. Please, come this way. We'll wait for them there.